Hi, my name is Gail Kovacevic. I'm a teacher from Escondido, California, and I'm presenting on empowering students through a self-assessment grading system. Now, I do not claim to be any kind of superhero or guru on grading, but I did some research, I went to a conference, and I tried something new, and I've had some pretty good success with it, so I would like to share that with you. So let's start today with a grading quiz. So number 1, in what year was the grading system of the 5 classifications using letters that correspond to percentages, A, B, C, D, and F, first introduced? That was in 1897. That is a very long time ago. The purpose of education has changed drastically since 1897, but our grading system really hasn't. Now, just because we've been doing it that way for so long doesn't mean that that's the best way that it should be done. And I'd challenge you to not criticize new grading systems any more than you're willing to criticize the current grading system. All right, quiz number 2. Imagine you are a parent or a tutor, and this is your child's gradebook. What concepts or skills can you tell that Desmond needs help with? So I see assignments, I see quizzes, homework, test, and I can see some low homework averages and extra credit, but as far as concepts are concerned, I really have no idea. I cannot tell because this gradebook is based completely on tasks, not concepts. What ideas were covered in chapter 3? I don't know. The 3.2 assignment and 3.2 quiz is overlapping of assessing of ideas. And so we really can't tell. There's a lot of stakeholders that have no idea just looking at a gradebook of what help these students actually need. All right, number 3, in the 101-point grading system, so that's from 0% to 100, how many ways can a student fail? So normally, failing grades is anything less than 60%. So here's 60%, and that would be 59 and below. So all the way from 0 to 59, that is 60 different ways to fail. That is a heck of a lot. I mean, do kids really need that many? How many ways do they really need to fail a class? Just one. Now, that's just on the 101-point grading system scale. What about if you use tenths of percents, like 65.3% or something like that? In that case, you would have 600 different ways to fail. And I mean, come on, that's crazy. This huge, huge scale is really unnecessary. All right, in this gradebook here, what grade should Charlie get? So Charlie's got some high scores, 93, 90, 83, 91s, 82, nothing less than a B. However, there's some zeros here. That's probably just because he didn't turn something in, or maybe they were homework grades and he didn't do the homework at home. So now his mean average is 59%. Technically, that would be a failing grade. I mean, do we really feel like that's what Charlie understands, that he's worth an F with his understanding? This gradebook is grading on behaviors, not understanding of the content. So that doesn't really seem fair to Charlie. Those zeros are huge outliers on the 101 point scale system, and they bring the mean average way, way down. That doesn't seem very fair. All right, so here's gradebook for 4 students, Adele, Jasmine, Simon, and Douglas. What grades should each of they get? Notice that their mean average is exactly the same for all of them. However, Adele started out strong, but then really kind of lost it at the end there. Jasmine, on the other hand, showed a ton of growth. She went from 10% all the way up to 100%. Simon was a pretty steady 70% across the board, and Douglas was hit or miss, 40% or 100% alternating. Now, if you just look at the mean average, really all of these kids should get C minuses. But I wonder, does that actually represent all of their performances? That doesn't take into account improvement, it doesn't take into account consistency, and I think that those sort of things should be considered when students are graded. In this system, they're not. Last one. What grades should Bob, Gwen, Roger, and Pam get? So this is a graph instead, where you have time assessments on the bottom. So at each of these tick marks, the students are being assessed. So they're formative assessments, and then the summative assessment is at the very, very end. So it looks like at the first assessment, Pam did not do so well at all. So she would get a low grade to the start. Roger did a little bit better, but not much. Gwen, at the first time, did pretty well, and Bob was a high flyer all the way. So in this case, Pam would not get a very good score. Bob would get a great score. Next time around, look how much Pam has gotten better. Look how much Roger has gotten better. Gwen's increased and Bob has stayed the same. Now, if you were to consider all of these assessments across the board, Bob would get a much better grade than Gwen, would get a much better grade than Roger, and Pam would be right down there at the bottom if we're counting all of these low percentages. But Pam made the most growth. Look at how much she has grown. Look how much she has improved. Why exactly is Pam being penalized for growth? She had the largest amount of growing to do, but because we are grading her on the formative assessments and not the summative, her grade was way lower, and that's not fair either. They all met the learning goal in the end, whatever their journey was. Shouldn't that matter? Shouldn't they all just get A's then? So here's what I think of the current grading system. In traditional grades, there's a lot of things that get mixed up into the pot. We've got homework, classwork, quizzes, tests, end of semester exams. Those are the typical things. But you may also include things like warm-ups, maybe some group work, some projects, reports, extra credit because you know they're going to ask for that. And if you're a really nifty teacher, perhaps you can throw in a couple experiments there as well. But that's not all. Don't they get graded on their attendance as well? If they're not here, they can't learn. And their participation, if they're not playing along, they're not going to learn anything. Their effort has got to make some kind of contribution here. There could be some extracurricular points that are earned. I mean, if you go to the school play, maybe I'll give you 10 points for your math grade. And then bonus points because you know we need cans of soup, and you know we need tissue boxes in the room. And last but not least, yes, some teachers figure out a way to get students' attitudes to affect their grades. Now, I teach high schoolers, and my high schoolers got a lot of attitude. Should their attitude really affect their grade in a math class? Now, not all of these things are worth the same either. Let's say quizzes and tests, exams, they might all be categorized together under assessments, and that might be, I don't know, like 70% of the grade or something like that. And then perhaps we have, classwork and group work. That'll be another like 20%. Your attendance will be another 5%. This all somehow gets mixed up and gives you a letter grade. Something on the 101 point scale. And honestly, it's really hard to tell what a kid's grade is going to be. You have to ask the computer system with all these weighted grades of what this grade is going to be, because I don't know. I can't figure it out, even though I have a math degree. This doesn't really work so well. There's so many different things that go into it, including non-academic things. There's different categories of different weights that complicates the whole thing. Usually there's a 1001 plus point scale from 0.0 to 100.0%. That's a huge scale. There's zeros for missing paperwork, not necessarily missing understanding, but missing paperwork. There's zeros for cheating, there's zeros for late work, extra credit in order to boost grades. The teacher grades everything, and the teacher grades everything. If the students do it, and it comes across my desk, I better give a score to it. And I better grade everything they do, otherwise they're just not gonna do it, right? This whole system is overly complicated, it's highly inaccurate, it's tedious and boring for us, and it's time-consuming for everybody. So here's what kids have to say about it. This was taken as from a survey from my own students, my 10th graders, in October of 2017. Most teachers have due dates, which puts a time limit on learning. I believe it's never too late to learn. The teachers see the numbers and not the individuals themselves. They don't feel like they're a part of it. The extra credit is just giving free points. It's just jumping through hoops to get points. There's no understanding there. Sometimes it's out of such a high percentage, it's really hard to bring up your grade. That huge scale is just so unattainable sometimes. Let's see, some kids will copy and that will give them the points, and then the teacher doesn't know, but they don't really understand, but they get the points. They get the A anyway. Some kids are actually smart and they understand it a different way. They just don't know how to show it on tests. They do understand, but they just can't show it. If a student fails, we shouldn't just leave it and move on. That's what we do. You get a low score, we go on to the next thing. Someone should go back and review. So, education has kind of devolved into this game of school where it's not necessarily based on learning, it's based on playing the game. The teacher is kind of in control of all of these points. They're the game master. How many points do you get for this? And how many points do you get for that? And when you have to do it and what it needs to include. And the kids are basically just negotiating. They're vying for all of these points. So some kids are really good at playing this game, like this kid right here. He knows the system. He knows how to work it. He's nice to the teacher. He turns things on time. He cheats to get everything, and he ends up getting a really, really good grade. He's fine with the system because he knows how to work it. This student over here, not so much. She might be very good with the content. She understands, she's learning, but she just doesn't like to play the game. It feels meaningless to her. She doesn't like having to keep begging for points or jumping through these hoops to get these points. And it's just this big game that's honestly not based on learning and not based on understanding anymore. Honestly, grades need to be accurate. They need to accurately reflect understanding. They need to be meaningful, not chapter 3, but some kind of concept instead. They need to be consistent, so it needs to be for the student, not just by teacher. So you can go to different teachers and they've all got their different games for points set up. You might get the easy teacher where it's easy to win their game, or the hard teacher where it's hard to win their game because their point system's set up to not help them very much. And really, it needs to support learning. Everything we do in the classroom should be because the students are going to learn more, including our grading system. What we have right now is bogus. There has got to be a better way. And there is. So I did some research, and this book has really been my Bible in my process of redoing my grading system. It's a repair kit for grading, 15 Fixes for Broken Grades by Ken O'Connor. He's he's the guru on grading from Canada, and here's what he suggests. This book is nice because it's short, it's easily digestible, there's little vignettes in there, there's suggestions for fixes, there's suggestions for how to get started. I highly recommend this book, even if you're just thinking about changing your grades or doing something a little bit different. So just to kind of summarize, he has fixes for distorted achievement, which means don't include behaviors. Don't lose credit for late paperwork. So that's, they were late, not they didn't understand. There shouldn't be extra credit or bonus points. You should either understand the material or not. We should not reduce the grade for cheating. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no punishment or there's no teaching on how to not cheat. But it's just you don't reduce the grade for cheating. So perhaps you have some other kind of consequences for students that cheat, but honestly, their academic grade should just represent their understanding. Take that student, give them some other kind of punishment rather than in the grade book. Give them an opportunity to demonstrate under controlled circumstances what they actually know, and give them the grade for that. Don't include attendance, that's grading for behavior, and don't include group scores. It needs to be for the individual. There's also fixes for low quality or poor organization. The items in your gradebook should be standards or concept based, not task based. So not this quiz, not that homework, but based on grading of ideas instead. There needs to be clear expectations, so students need to know exactly what to do in order to do well. The students should be pitted against the standards, not each other. So we don't want comparison of you're better than this person, they're better than you, because then that's very sort of competitive in the classroom, and that's not really good, because then there are some winners and there are some losers, and we don't want any of these losers. And we need a quality assessment so that we can clearly understand what the kids know and what they are struggling on. There's also fixes for grade calculation. So don't be so mean, use your judgment. In the warm-up quiz, we saw how mean the mean can really be. Getting a whole bunch of zeros that are outliers drags that grade down so far on that huge 101 or 1001 point scale. And sometimes just averaging them all together does not account for growth, and it does not account for consistency. Give incompletes instead of zeros. Zeros are horrible. They feel terrible to get. They really bring a student's self-esteem down. Nobody wants to be a zero. So I use incompletes in my classroom instead. You're not a zero because you haven't done it. You're incomplete because it's not completed yet. Last, supports for fixes for supporting learning. We should only use summative assessment. So that's at the end of the unit. That's the only thing that should be included in the grades. Don't grade them on how low they might be in the beginning on these formative assessments. Just include the very last grade, their test grades or whatever you have, into the gradebook, not all like pop quizzes and things in between. Emphasize recent achievement, so growth over time is really important. But absolutely, the very most important fix for broken grades that Ken O'Connor mentions throughout his entire book is to involve the students. So many times students feel like grades is just something that's being done to them, that they're not a part of it. My teacher gave me this grade because they like me or don't like me. And you say, oh, well, you earned that grade. Well, really, you were the games master. You were inventing all the ways that students have to play the game to earn your points. You did give them that grade. They just weren't very good at playing your game. If you involve the students, give them a stake in what is going on, give them an opinion of what is going on, they're going to feel so much more bought into this entire process, and they're going to own their learning and own their grade much more. So here's my new grading system. I read that book and I went to a conference and I read some other pieces of information, and I kind of dove into the deep end and I said, I'm going to overhaul my grading system and do something totally new. And I tried it and I think it worked decently well. So let me try and explain what my grading system is. So in my grading system, the students completely assess themselves. They grade themselves. I'm involving them very highly. I serve just to double check what is going on, that I agree with their grades, that it matches the evidence that I see in the room. This departs a lot of trust on my students. They appreciate that. I have a 5-level proficiency scale, so not from 0 to 100, from 1 to 5. So even if a student gets, even if I were, and I don't, to include a 0, it's not such a horrible outlier that it brings the mean down so much. So just a 5-level proficiency scale is honestly all you need. And then there's one way to fail and not 60 ways to fail. I base it on 8 to 10 big ideas per semester. They're all based off of the Common Core state standards. So I have to break my semester down. I identify somewhere between 8 and 10 big ideas, and the kids are graded on those ideas and how well they understand those ideas. I do not give zeros. I only give incompletes. If they're not done assessing themselves or they haven't given enough evidence, they get an incomplete in my gradebook, which is just a blank until they get it done. There's no deductions for being late because honestly, it's never too late to learn. Some students take a lot longer to understand something than others. They should not be punished for that. They need time. That's how you can differentiate instruction. There's no points to earn whatsoever. Honestly, it's just giving yourself a score based off of a 5-level rubric, and the students do it to themselves. So there's no points to earn. And for me, I do a letter grade based off of average over all of the summative assessments of the 8 to 10 big ideas. So here is my 5-point proficiency scale. On the very top, a 5 is you understand it so well that you can teach it to other people. In my understanding, in my experience, when I was in college learning math, I never learned it so well until I had to go back and teach it to students. That's when I really understood math. So I thought the best that someone could get in understanding something is being able to teach it to other people. 4 is the next step down. I can do it all on my own. So that would kind of look like a traditional classroom where you sit a student down with a test in front of them. They have to do it all by themselves. That's a 4 to me, not a 5. So that's actually lower. A 3, I can do it with my notes to help me. So maybe some notes that they took during class that will kind of help point them in the right direction. A 2 is I can do it if someone helps me. So I would put students together, they can work together to understand. That to me is a 2. A 1 is I can't do it because I haven't tried yet. So that is the lowest. I don't include a 0 just because a 0 feels terrible. No one wants to be a 0. A 0 is nothing. It's like you're calling a kid nothing. I don't like that at all. So I chose these, and I chose 5 levels so that they could basically equate to the A, B, C, D, and F that I'm required to in my district put on their grade reports. I can't get around that. So I have to give A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's. So an A, you have to be able to understand it so well in order to teach it. That's what you need to get an A in my class. The traditional classes where you can do it all by yourself and get 100%, that's only a B to me. So I have a lot of high rigor here as well. Notice that all of this is in kid-friendly language. I know there's a lot of rubrics out there that will say things like, oh, mastering or proficient or approaching proficiency or something like that. Kids can't grade themselves on that because they don't understand what that looks like. Those need to be very clearly defined. And that might look different from standard to standard, from big idea to other big idea. All of this is in kid-friendly language. We know what it looks like if I can teach it. We know what it looks like if I can do it with my notes. And all of this would be appropriate to any kind of big idea, any sort of Common Core based skill they need at all. So this can apply to everything, and it's student friendly. So here's how I set this up. Before the semester began, I went through the entire semester's worth of curriculum and I examined it. I had from that to organize and identify what are the 8 to 10 big ideas. I know it's important for students to be able to do this and do that and do the other, but I mean, 10 years from now, they're not going to remember how to do all those tiny little things. What are the big ideas? What are the big takeaways that you want for these students for 10 years from now? So I would identify what those 8 to 10 were, something like that per semester, and then I would match those with the Common Core state standards. Now, this is no easy task. This can be time consuming, this can be tricky. I know in my district we have had actually formed a team of teachers to sit through and do this for all of our years. I tried this on my own, and it is time consuming and it is tricky, and you're kind of giving it your best guess at first, but after a while it gets a little bit easier. This is honestly the trickiest part. So after that, I make these self-assessment sheets for each of the big ideas. So in my forms, it will say what lessons in my book correspond. It will name what the actual big idea is. So for example, here's one. I can model situations with vertex edge graphs and matrices and use them to find optimum paths and networks. I identify what Common Core state standards those match with. So I have the content standards and I have standards for mathematical practice here. And then I have 3 sections. The first section is for them to assess themselves after the first lesson. They can put the date and after the first lesson we've done together. So again, it's still very formative. They're not going to necessarily keep this grade, but it's just to see how they change over time. They will mark themselves as a 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 of how they did so far. And then they'll explain to me here how their day went. What did you understand? What did you get stuck on? Did someone help you? Did you help somebody else? How did you feel? They're basically just writing the story of what their understanding of that main idea is so far. So then we'll do another couple lessons or something like that. And then they'll assess themselves again after the quiz. So they'll put that date. Maybe they did a little bit better. Maybe they did a little bit worse. Maybe they're the same, whatever it is. And then they'll explain to me how that date went for them. So how did the quiz go? Did you get better? What are you still stuck on? Can you help somebody? Did you need your notes? Just talk to me. And it's really nice to kind of hear the kids talk to you in this form. So lastly, I have the kids do a test, and I'll explain what test day looks like because for me that's different as well. So they'll take the test and then they'll assess themselves on that big idea again. So they might choose a particular score. And then they'll talk to me again. How did the test today go for you? Blah, 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 blah. And after that, they'll consider all of their learning through the trajectory of the unit. And they'll decide overall what their final grade is, what they believe it should be. So perhaps they didn't start out so great and then they did better and maybe they did worse again. Just overall on that big idea, what grade do you think you should earn and why? So they'll explain to me here again, why is that their final grade? Why is this the one that should go in my grade book? So these other 3 were just for them to be able to see their growth, was for them to give themselves their own feedback, to be metacognitive about their learning and their understanding. So here is where they tell me what grade should go in the grade book. I don't include any of the other ones before that. They hold on to this form until the very end of the unit. So this is kind of nice because you always have that 1 or 2 students that on test day, they really don't do so well. And maybe that's not because they don't understand. Maybe they had a really bad day. Maybe they had a fight with their parents the night before. Maybe they didn't sleep. Maybe something's going on with them emotionally. Maybe they feel sick. So just because they do poorly on test day doesn't mean that that's the grade that has to go in the grade book. They can talk to me. They can tell me their story down here and just exactly why they should get the grade that they should get, whatever that happens to be. So I make one of these forms, and one of these forms will be for each of the main ideas. So I only make between 8 to 10 of these for the entire semester. And it's kind of nice because this helps me streamline instruction. So I can look through, and now that I know what my big ideas are, what the takeaways are, what I want my kids to get out of the semester with me in my class, I can go through our textbook and I can examine the problems and examine the lessons and think, does this attach to a main idea? If not, I don't necessarily have to bother teaching it. So it really points to the main goal of what am I teaching and why am I teaching this? So during the lessons, it's very important to have the students collaborate as much as possible. This whole grading system is built on student collaboration. So as I'm facilitating the lessons, I'm trying to be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. I'm going to give my students problems, pose puzzles for them, let them work their way through it, let them discuss their ideas, let them explain their thinking, let them decide what's right and wrong. So my job as facilitator is to encourage the students to ask each other questions and to help each other. So one way I get them to do that is I have them seated in teams of 4. And they work together on the problems. I'll have them choose a reader. The student will read the problem aloud while the other ones follow along with their eyes. I'll have them all talk about it, make sure all voices are heard, and then they decide as a team what to write. I call that the read, talk, write format. When I'm going around, if someone raises their hand and they say, I have a question, I say, is this a me question or a we question? It needs to be a team question, not just a student question. So if they raise your hand and they say, I have a question, I'll go to a different student in the team and I'll say, what's your team's question? If they can't answer, then it's not a we question and I don't answer it. They need to ask each other in their team first, and then if they all have the same question, then I can come and point them in the right direction. I could either directly answer their question, I could send a representative from another team to come over and help get them unstuck, or I could send one of them over to another team as a visitor to help get some guidance and get unstuck. But really, I'm trying to get the kids to talk to each other as much as possible and have me do the least amount of direct instruction as possible. So during all this kind of collaborative learning together, I will do random spot checks for understanding. So I will randomly select a student. I have them seated by playing cards, so like 7 of hearts, 2 of diamonds, that kind of thing. So I'll randomly pull a card and I'll go to that student and I'll kind of ask them questions about what they're learning to see what they're understanding so far. And I'll also do spot checks of the current score. Say, okay, here's our main idea. Right now, where would you score yourself and why? That helps the students kind of wrap their head around where the level system, so they'll think, okay, I'm doing this with my notes, so I think I'm a 3 right now, etc. And it helps them be metacognitive about their learning, to think about where they are right now. So I facilitate, and then we do our evaluations. The first evaluation is after the first day or 2. The second one is after a quiz, and I'll actually do parts of the quiz individual, and then parts of the quiz collaborative after. The third evaluation will be right after the test. So that was the one you saw earlier, right after the test. And then directly after the test on that same day, they will decide what their final score is. That's the final evaluation. That is the one that goes into my gradebook. So assessment day. This is test day. It looks a little bit different for me, and quiz day follows a very similar kind of procedure. So I need to give them time to consider on this main idea, are they a 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1? So here's how I start. I give them the test, and this is a district test that everyone in my school district gives. It's the same one. I give them 15 minutes to work as a 4. That's individual, and that's no notes. So they are sitting by themselves, they have no notes, just a pencil and calculator. They see how much they can do all on their own. This is what a traditional test looks like. I only do this for 15 minutes. So they go back through their test. After 15 minutes, I ask them to go back through their test, and any problems that they could do all on their own with no help whatsoever, write the number 4 next to those. So they're kind of considering what they're doing so far. Then I set the timer and I ask them to work for 15 minutes as a 3. So now they can take their notes out. They're still doing this individually to see how much they could do on their own, except now their notes are there to help them. Now, if they were still flying along as a 4 and I interrupted the class and said, okay, now you can be a 3, those students who still feel like they want to challenge themselves and work as a 4 are welcome to do so. They don't have to stop and have to take out their notes if they still don't need it. So after another 15 minutes, I call time and I say, all right, any problems that you could now do with the help of your notes, would you write the number 3 next to those? If the students challenged themselves and kept working as a 4, they can write the number 4 next to those problems as well. So that's about after half an hour. After that, students have only so far checked to be able to see if there are 4 or a 3. Now we need to know if there are any 2s or 5s in the room. So I open the room up for collaboration. They can move around to whoever they need to. They can start talking in their teams and compare what they have so far. I walk around to see if there's anyone that is stuck on anything, and I can buddy them up with someone else. But basically, they're trying to take all the problems that they couldn't do as a 3 or a 4, find someone to help them so that they can move up from a 1 to a 2. And the students who were 3s and 4s, they need to find someone who needs help so that they can move up to a 5. So I'll do this for at least 30 minutes. It depends on the content specifically. And afterwards, they will complete their self-assessment, that 30 evaluation, and then decide their final score. Now, my job while they're doing all of this is to continue facilitating. While they're doing the individual portion, I'm walking around, I'm looking at their papers, I'm identifying the students who are stuck, I'm identifying the students that are breezing along and doing well, I'm identifying the students that are working, but they have a lot of incorrect answers. So I might, since this is like quiet individual time, come and sit next to a kid and quietly whisper maybe some questions to them or something that kind of get them to rethink their methods if they're on the wrong track, or to maybe help unstick them somehow. But I'm not directly instructing. And then when we get to the collaborative part, that's when I make sure that all of the incorrect work is getting corrected, not by me correcting, but by budding them up with people who are on the right track to help them out. Or I might say, oh, this person over here got an answer different than you. Can you compare? And let's see which one is right. So I'm just facilitating them collaborating and getting the answers correct. So during assessment day, I'm monitoring for gaps in understanding. I'm helping mistakes get resolved without directly teaching, and I'm teaching what a true 2 is. In the beginning of the year, you're always going to get those students who think that a 2 is just copying off of another student. But really, it's I can do it now that someone has explained it to me. So what I would do for those students that are just copying off another paper and are not asking questions and are not having discussions, I would come sit next to them and say, okay, I notice you're getting help. Can you explain to me what you understand so far? Most of the time they'll say, oh, I don't know, I'm just writing it down. I would say to them, oh, you're not really trying then. That's a 1. That's not a 2. You need to understand what this problem is asking and how to solve it and what the solution means. So then instead I'll say, talk to this person here. I'm going to come back and you tell me what you understand after a little while. So they need to know what a true 2 is. It's not just copying. Copying is a 1. So after they understand what that is, I double check to make sure that they're either putting a 1 if they're honestly just copying, or they're putting a 2 if I come back and they can explain it and understand. And I want to verbally, out loud, praise improvement loud enough so that other people in the room can hear as well. So I'll come around and maybe a student was a 3 on something when they did it individually. And then I come back around and now they're teaching someone else. I'll say, hey, that's awesome. You needed your notes to do this, but now you don't, and you can teach someone else. You've moved from a 3 to a 5. Awesome job. I'm so proud of you. Then they want to do better. They want to do better. They like that. So at the end of assessment day, the student considers their overall understanding of the main idea, and they decide their final score. Again, that doesn't have to be the test day, because maybe they had a bad day. And it doesn't have to it doesn't have to be an average over time. If at first they were a 2, then at the second evaluation they were a 2, but now they understand it and on test day they're a 5, they can give themselves a score of 5. They do not have to include those formative at all. Honestly, it's just based off of their judgment. I'm deferring to their judgment because nobody understands more what they know than themselves. The students know themselves better than we do. So the student will also attach evidence of understanding. So I don't just want that assessment, I want evidence of their learning as well. Now, I personally require them to attach their quizzes and tests, but they don't necessarily have to if that doesn't represent their best understanding. Maybe some other work we did in the classroom they want to include. Maybe they want to supplement the quizzes and tests with some other work that they feel like they really nailed it on that day and they want me to see. Whatever work is going to support the score they are giving themselves. The students will submit their evaluation forms and their evidence as a packet for that big idea. So now it's my job to go back through and consider if I agree or disagree with their evaluation. So I'll review the students' evidence. I want to make sure they have correct answers because it's not just about what you do. We want to make sure they're getting it right as well. I need to consider the student explanations. I read through and hear what they've said to me. I need to consider the evidence, if it supports that they understand or not, what score they gave themselves, and my own classroom observations. I will often go around with a clipboard and I'll kind of record what the students are doing. Like, okay, I can see that Jimmy's a 2 right now. He might need some help. I can see that Cynthia's already a 5. I might want to buddy her up with some 2s. So I might make some notes throughout the unit just to see where kids are. I'll compare what they have turned into me against my observations. Now, I'll either agree and enter that score into a gradebook, or I will disagree and I will conference with that student. I will sit and I will talk to them. Now, most of the time, students are going to be harder on themselves than I would be. They typically give themselves lower scores than I have observed in the room. They're hard on themselves. You would think, oh yeah, the kids are just gonna all give themselves 5s because they want it to be easy. But honestly, if they're setting these standards, they want to do well. I've typically seen them be pretty hard on themselves. So a lot of the time, I would give them a higher score than they've given themselves. But higher or lower, if I disagree with their score, then I will conference with the student. Now, the whole goal of me conferencing with them is not to tell them what I think. The goal is for me to get more information from them, to ask them questions about their perspective, to really listen to them. If you pull them aside and you're just talking at them and telling them what you think, you completely disregard their opinion in the room. Your goal in conferencing with them is to learn more from their perspective. And honestly, they are so honest with you. If you say to them, perhaps, I see this work here and, can you tell me about this? Because I'm not sure if you understand this. Are you really a 3 on this? Then they'll say, no, I actually just copied. I'm a 1. Like, oh, okay. Would you like to try again? So it's really nice to sit in conference with them if you disagree. I usually have quite a decent number of disagreements in the first couple of big ideas because the students are still getting used to the system. So it might take some time, but after a while they tend to get it, and then this happens very little by the end of the year. So there's a number of things we got to watch out for. Watch out for misscoring based off of stereotypes. Girls will very often score themselves lower than they deserve. Especially if it's for something like mathematics, they feel like they're not math people, that they deserve lower scores. So you need to watch out for that, as well as boys will typically score themselves a little bit higher than they deserve. So watch out for those. Missing assessments. If students weren't here on assessment day, or maybe they didn't finish or something, I don't give them a 0, I give them an incomplete. That just means you need to finish it and get it to me. So there's no markdowns for turning in late because maybe a student really just needed more time on that. So any self-assessments that need revision. So say a student happened to turn in a self-assessment to me and they happen to have a lot of incorrect scores. Maybe when I was monitoring, I didn't do such a great job and that student slipped past me and I didn't notice and didn't intervene in time to make sure they were on the right track. In that case, I could ask them to redo it. My school, we have tutorial periods where I get extra time in the room with the kids, and if that's the case, I will give them their self-assessments back and say, hey, you need to try these problems again. Try it on your own. If you can't do it on your own, try it with your notes. If you can't do it with your notes, ask someone to help you, but I make sure they get it right. The goal is for them to understand, and the level by which they understand, either with a friend, with the notes, on their own, that determines their grade. Once in a while, I have to do a class-wide reassessment. So perhaps I didn't do such a great job teaching and they were all kind of on the wrong track, or there's some misconceptions that I need to clear up. I can do another lesson and then do a class-wide reassessment. And I can do those at any time that I like. So it doesn't just have to be within that unit. I can do that whenever is appropriate. And finals day. Now, normally on finals, you give the students a cumulative exam over the entire semester and they tank it and it brings down their grade. I don't like that. On finals day, that's an opportunity for students to reassess themselves. So perhaps over the semester, they were doing pretty well, but there's just one or two self-assessments that they didn't do so well, but they feel like they could do better. So I spend finals day by giving students problems based off of one of the main ideas that they want to work on. I'll have them work collaboratively again and then reassess themselves. Now, you don't have to give them a brand new reassessment form every single time. This could be completely casual if you want it to be. You could just ask them to do a problem on a piece of lined paper, and then at the very bottom, give me a sentence of what score you deserve now and why. And that's it. That could be your evidence that you could add to their folder. For students that also don't do very well having to write things down. The students that they understand, they understand the math or the content, but they're just not the kind of person that writes things down on paper. That's when I would actually pull that student aside and sit with them one-on-one and assess them verbally instead. I would talk to them, I would ask them questions, I'd ask them to explain to me, how did you do this problem? Did you use your notes? Did you not? And then maybe I'll jot some notes down on their self-assessment form, and that's what will go into the gradebook, including their evidence. There are ways around it. They don't have to jump through all of these hoops. You just make it work. You find a way to make it work. So, final grade calculation. This is honestly up to your professional judgment. Don't just let the number crunching do all the decision making for you. If it goes against your professional judgment, then it's probably wrong. I've seen a number of different ways that other teachers have kind of accumulated the grades and assigned them to A's, B's, C's, D's, and F based on these rubrics. One teacher I saw just used the mode. What's the most common score that appears? If most of your scores are 4s, then you have a B in the class, for example. I use a mean average, which it is okay to do it across summative assessments, not formative. So I don't want to do a mean average over time of one main idea, like first evaluation, second evaluation, third evaluation of one main idea, because they're probably not going to be very far along in the beginning, and I don't want to penalize them for growth. But for all of the 8 to 10 separate assessments, I do an average of those because those are all summative assessments. For me, ranges of scores can translate to letter grades. So if your mean average is a 4.4 or higher, you get an A in my class. A 4.3 to 3.7 is a B, etc., etc. So for me, you have to be getting help or using your notes about a little less than half the time in order to get a passing grade in my class. If you're just learning from someone else the entire semester, that's not enough. I want to push you to be able to do some of this just using your notes at least some of the time. Over the semester, you might think, oh, well, a student gets a 5 on their first self-assessment, and then since I don't give zeros, what if they just never did the rest of them? Do they get an A in the class? Not for me. For me, they need to assess themselves on all of the main ideas across the semester in order to get a grade in the class. If any of them are missing, then I give that student a no mark. So in my district, we have no marks. That means that they just don't get a grade. It's blank. And in which case, in my district, they get the following semester to finish it up, to make it up. So instead of getting a letter grade, if they have incomplete assessments, they get a no mark instead, and they have to finish that in order to get a grade. So here is exactly what my spring 2018 gradebook looked like for Math 2. This is it. So there's a number of students on the side here. I have my averages of their self-assessments, and I did 10 self-assessments in the first semester, so I just started with number 11, number 12, number 18, so there was 8 for the second semester. So this student here, you can see they got a couple of 1s. They didn't even try in the end. In the beginning or in the middle, they were doing really well. So overall, that student got a C in my class. All of their self-assessments were done. This student here just didn't even come the second semester, so they didn't complete any of these self-assessments, so they got a no mark. That's not an F. They're not an F because I don't even know what they understand. They weren't here, so they get a no mark. If they want to come the following semester and complete those with me, then they can. So this is basically all that it looks like. This is for the entire semester, so it's really clean. It's easy to understand. Each of these self-assessments are worth the same. I just made them worth 1 point each, essentially, and that's just because my gradebook needs some kind of weight to know how to compare them. So I made them all worth the same, max out of 5. And notice here that they're based off of main ideas. Self-assessment 11 was about how much do you understand function notation. This one was quadratic function. This is logarithms, etc., etc. So any stakeholders, parents, tutors, counselors, whatever, they can look at my gradebook and know exactly what kind of help the student needs. So let's pick somebody. So like this student right here that got the C, they really needed help with probability. Expected values and probabilities right there, that's what they were getting stuck on. So I could design lessons. If I'm a tutor, I can design lessons around that. I can find some way to help that kid because I know the topics that they're getting stuck on instead. So they're not getting grades based off of tasks at all. They're getting grades based off of ideas. There's another teacher's gradebook. What they've decided, they wanted to try my system out, and this is kind of what they decided. They still used a 5-level scale. They used a 0, which I personally don't like zeros, but that's what they decided. They wanted the words proficiency in there, so they used those words proficiency. But what's kind of nice is they also gave a teacher's explanation and they gave a student's explanation. So this is the way the students can assess themselves. I can do this well enough to teach to others. I can do this without help. I need a little bit of help. So at least it's in kid-friendly language as well. So their grade assignments, they decided to do a mean average and to consider mode as well. So in order to get an A in the class, this student has to have a mean average between 3.3 and 4.0, and only 3s and 4s are allowed. So for me, this is the same as 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. And honestly, the math works out exactly the same. For me, it was a 4.4 to a 5.0, and the math works out exactly the same. So if a student in this system were to get a 0, it's not going to be such a huge outlier compared to 100%. That's only a step of 4 away, so that's really not that far, that it's really not that mean to do something like that. So this is another teacher's approach. So this system is not perfect. I'm still making tweaks to it. I'm still making some changes. There's some things that don't necessarily work so well. So, for example, this system is a little bit difficult in that a student will not get a grade in a semester until we do the first self-assessment together. But that's already at the end of a unit of learning. So it kind of makes that difficult because then counselors for a while cannot see what students' grades are. They're just all blank for a little while. So that makes it difficult. And I've also received criticism with the fact that colleges don't grade this way. So is this getting them set up for college kind of thing? Well, honestly, education is moving in this direction. I just kind of dove in right away. And some colleges aren't even looking at GPAs anymore. And honestly, I think that the more you can get students to be metacognitive, the better they're going to understand, and they're actually might do okay in college. Honestly, these kids have had so many years playing the game of school and earning the points. They know how to play that game, whether or not they choose to do it. They don't need another lesson from me in how to play the game. I want to give them a different experience. So there are some benefits definitely to this system. It's simple, it's easy, it's not overly complicated like traditional grading is. It's accurate, it just reflects understanding. Nothing else, nothing non-academic, no behaviors in there, just understanding. This is high rigor. In order to get an A in my class, you have to have 5s most of the time. You have to be able to teach other people most of the time. In other traditional classes, if you do it all by yourself, you can get an A. That's not enough for me. In my class, that would only get you a B. You have to be able to understand it so well that you can help others understand it in order to get an A in my class. Really, honestly, there's kind of no more cheating in my class at all. I don't give out homework. It's all collaborative. It's all in class. And honestly, if they copy each other, they know that's a 1. That's not a 2. And they know I'm going to come around and I'm going to bug them. And if I see them just blindly copying, I'm going to ask them questions, and then they're going to be forced to have to explain. So they just don't bother with that anymore. They ask, can I have help? Can you show me how to do this? It highly, highly, highly promotes collaboration. The students absolutely have to work together. They're working as a team. They're not working against each other for standing in the class. When they help each other, that helps not just the other student, that helps you as well. You get to move up to a 5 while they get to move up to a 2. It highly promotes collaboration. It gives the students feedback and they get to see progress. They're giving their own feedback. They can see themselves progressing and how much they're growing. There is a lot of student buy-in to this system. They feel empowered. They're in control. And they actually kind of think it's fun to grade themselves. I've had students say it's fun for me to give myself a grade. They actually enjoy test day. I mean, give me a break. The kids are enjoying test day. And I've seen huge increased effort and performance. The culture in my classroom has shifted drastically to when I was grading completely traditionally in the previous year. The kids want to do well. They want to understand. They want to help each other. They really care about doing well because they want to grade themselves highly. And because of that, my scores, my grades have been the highest that I have ever had. This is the 2017 to 18 grades for 3 integrated Math 2 classes. About a third of this class, of my classes, it was like 175 kids, earned A's. Those are not free A's. Those are, most of the time, you understand it so well that you're teaching someone else how to do it. I had about a third of the class that could just do it all by themselves. I had about a little less than a third of the class that needed their notes. And I only had 10% of students that were not meeting A through G. 90% of my students are meeting A through G for California University acceptance. That's huge. I only had 1% of my students fail. That is enormous. That is huge. It's made such big differences. And again, it's because the culture in the room is changing so drastically. They want to work together. They want to do well. They are trying really, really stinking hard to do well. And they're collaborating the entire time. Now, this is all wonderful, but to be honest, one of my favorite benefits of this system is that I am spending way less time grading. All the homework we have to take home as teachers, sitting there grading, going through right answer, wrong answer, -5 points, +2 points, that's so boring. We're mindless machines that are just going through and calculating. It's so time consuming. It is so boring. And now I'm giving all that hard work to the kids. They are grading themselves. I'm just going through and I'm double checking. And when I do have to spend time going through their self-assessments, it's much more fun. It's so much more enjoyable. I'm not just going through like a robot looking for right or wrong answers. I'm reading what my students are saying. I have a dialogue with my students and I'm reading their stories and they talk to me. They'll say, "Oh, this is going so well. I'm so proud of myself that I helped someone else do this today," or "I'm really struggling, but I know I can do better." They seem to be really, really positive people and they like discussing what they understand with me. It's so much more fun when I get to do it. And honestly, now my personal time is my personal time. I'm only spending about 10%, I would say, of the time at home grading that I did in the previous year. Huge difference. I get to spend more time with my family, and when I have time in the classroom, my prep time to work, I'm not sitting there just chugging through papers. I'm spending more time on developing lessons and lesson planning, which is a much better use of my time. The kids get so much more out of that if I spend more time lesson planning than I do grading. So there's a lot of positive response from my students. So this was from the same fall 2018. I think this was mid-October that I did this, the survey with my 10th graders. Grading myself is fun and being honest about it. You get to see yourself improving. It's really up to the fact now whether or not you understand. Now they can know if they really understand or not. This is going to cause more students being successful instead of feeling stressed or depressed by that big 0. And by the way, that student drew that 0 way bigger on the paper. Those zeros hurt. They don't like them. It's a lot better because you get a chance to explain yourself. It lets the students know what they need to improve on, as well as the teachers, and the students feel themselves in their grade. They get to see their own individuality within their grades. So in this same survey, asking some questions, 55% of the students thought that traditional grading systems are unfair and do not correctly represent understanding. 76% of those students said that they think this new system is much more fair and much more accurate to represent their understanding. 17% of them didn't say whether or not they thought it was. So that's almost all of the kids. Now this was in October, so this is after my students just had a couple of months experience with the system. When I surveyed them again at the very end of the year, this was 100% of the students. At the end of the year, 100% of my students thought that this system was much more fair and accurate. They're happier kids. And it's not just my students and it's not just me, but I have the full support of my administrators. So I'm minimizing the game of grades and maximizing student learning. Increasing student autonomy leads to a more positive disposition. They're happier students, and they're doing better because of it. So they're being led through a metacognitive process, which is very helpful for any sort of thing they're going to do, including college and career. And it's really has just transformed what my classroom looks like. They do so much better now. There is a video of assessment day if you're interested in seeing my actual classroom and the students actually working together on test day, what that looks like. Please follow the link to the YouTube video right here. So thank you. I hope this kind of gives you a little bit of inspiration, not necessarily to do exactly what I have done because the system's not perfect, but I feel like it's a step in the right direction. I'm getting results. The students are enjoying it. My administration is definitely all for it. And even if you don't do exactly what I was doing, do your own spin on this or do something completely different. I hope this just inspires you to think a little bit differently about traditional grading systems, to think about our current practices with grading, and think about what might be better for our students, what better supports learning. And again, I recommend that that book. It gives you some steps in the right direction if you just want to try one thing different. I know, again, I just went whole hog and I did something radically different. If you want to do just maybe make a couple changes, definitely read that book, the Repair Kit for Grading, 15 Fixes for Broken Grades by Ken O'Connor. But personally, if you wanted my opinion on just a couple things to try, number one, I would say get rid of zeros. I would also say to only grade them on the summative assessments, not formative. And see if you can ask your kids to be metacognitive about it. So how much do you understand so far? What are you stuck on? Sort of thing, just to get them thinking metacognitively about their own learning. Again, whatever you do is up to you. The book I recommended could definitely help give you some other ideas as well. Please, if you have any questions or you want to shoot some ideas or you want to talk some more or anything, please email me at any time and I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you so much for listening.